Hey everybody, this is a members preview for today's members episode. If you want to hear the whole thing and you're listening on YouTube, go ahead and hit the join button or the link in the description to become a member on YouTube. And if you're listening to this on the podcast feed, go ahead and become a member at theconfessionalspodcast.com/join, and you can hear the whole episode today. Today, we have Justin Brown on the show. Justin, how are you, man?
I'm good, Tony. Thank you for having me, brother.
Here in the flesh, in studio. You are the host of Prometheus Lens Podcast on YouTube. Tell people about it and where they can find it.
Yeah, Prometheus Lens Podcast is just a show where I say we use the allegory of the Prometheus lens to take a second look at everything. Because oftentimes we find, what we've been told, what we've been taught, when we look for ourselves, it's usually quite different story.
Yeah.
And so I like looking at conspiracy theory, ancient history, lost civilizations, the Bible. All those things are on the table.
That's cool, man. You started, I think you said last October, and you've been cooking away and stuff. I've been looking at your YouTube channel here, and you've had a lot of great guests on here. Tim Alvarino, Marzulli, Karen Wilkinson, so Gary Wayne. And so people should definitely check it out. I mean, people who enjoy these topics of, these off topics of Nephilim or ancient history. I mean, that's kind of the rabbit hole that they're going to get with you.
Yeah.
And speaking of rabbit holes, you brought in a Nephilim skull.
Yes.
And
fresh out of the garden.
Yeah. Full disclosure, this is our second attempt doing this conversation because we were about 10 minutes into our conversation and Jack's like, stop. I'm like, what are you doing? And he said, the system stopped recording. I'm like, how? And he said, system overload. So hopefully it doesn't happen again, but you brought in this replica and it's so stinking cool, man. And we had this whole conversation about it that we're not going to try to recreate. So
you guys should have been there.
Should have been there, but it's just now for the three of us. But yeah, this is a really cool piece. So if you're on YouTube and stuff, check, you can watch and see this skull and table. If you're not on YouTube and you're just listening, go to YouTube and check it out, and while you're there, hit a subscribe. So yeah, anybody who wants to check out your podcast, Prometheus Lens Podcast, the link will be in the description of this episode. And sometimes we do forget to do that. And so if we forget to put the link in the description, please just email us, and I know you will, and then we'll put it in there. But you could also just look up Prometheus Lens Podcast and find it yourself. I'm just saying, it's so funny. Like people will, I'll forget to put a link for a podcast, and we say it on the show, and they'll email saying, where can I find it? You forgot to put the link. Just hit the search engine, man. Yeah. Like instead of waiting for me to answer your email.
You're in the time of instant gratification. Yeah. Okay? Everybody wants it now and a click away.
And just like, holy cow. You could have found it before you even hit send on the email. But anyways,
it took more time to send the email than for you to search.
Right. Like that's some serious dedication to sit and wait for the response. I honor it. So today we're going to kind of get into this topic of, Esau. And like you mentioned on the previous conversation, how you were on the Bump podcast with Bo, and he called it the Epic of Esau. And I was like, that's a great title. Not going to steal it. Maybe I will. I don't know. But
going to rush and get it trademarked real quick.
Yeah. It's this storyline that isn't often told with Esau from the Bible, and how Esau might have been one of the earlier seeds of this creature or thing that we call Bigfoot. Over the years, people have constantly hit me up asking what my thoughts are on Esau being a Bigfoot, or could Esau be a Bigfoot? And I always just said, I don't know, because I don't know. I've never really looked into it. And it's just a topic that never really crossed the table.
If you let the text just say what it says.
Yeah.
It says he come out covered in hair from head to toe, like a hairy cloak, and was red. That sounds pretty squatchy to me. I mean, if you take your preconceived notions and what you think and what you believe and what you want it to be, I mean, it's pretty clear to me, that he was different.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the common launching point for this idea, right? I mean, it's like, well, people don't come out covered in hair head to toe. And it sounds like he's like, and you got the red hair, which is the Nephilim DNA, and is there a connection with Esau being a Nephilim? Have you come across any information on that?
Nothing comes right out and just, says it definitively.
Mm-hmm.
But as I went digging not only through the Bible, through the Midrash and through extra biblical books like Jasher and Jubilees, and then even ancient myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh, all these things have similarities and common themes, I think, that line up and make a good case for that very point, in my opinion.
That's interesting. So the story of Esau, let's get into that and kind of launch from there, because this is going to be a little bit of a journey going from the story of Esau to even the Garden of Eden and these garments that come up in different texts, and how I think you described them as possibly Satan's garments or something like that.
Yeah. I believe that these garments were the priestly robes of the Nakash.
Okay. So I don't know what any of that means, so you'll have to break that down for me too. But let's start off with the launching point of Esau and this story of this hairy man, because he wasn't just a normal person. Like, he was born that way, but then he grew into being a great hunter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where do we go from here when it comes to this idea of Esau being a Bigfoot? I mean, is there some kind of like manipulation of his genes that happened before birth, or what?
Well, one thing, if you go and look into like the scientific definition of what Esau would be, the street term would be Wolfman syndrome. And you see the pictures, these guys in these circus shows, these freak shows, the bearded lady and things like that. Well, the scientific term is hypertrichosis. And I never knew this till I started doing this research, but when you are in your womb, you are covered in hair.
Really?
Yes, it's like a defense mechanism, maybe to keep you warm or something like that. And at a certain stage, the woman's genome signals for you to shed that hair. So when they're born like that, it was a malfunction or something went wrong in the coding of your DNA, and you didn't shed that hair. But then I also found that in certain situations of anorexia, if you are out in the bush and it's winter and you are starving, your fat is meant to insulate you and keep you warm. Your body is a survival tool. It adapts, it changes. So that I read, when you have anorexia and it's cold outside, as a defense mechanism, your body will produce fine hair to keep warm. So, I mean, there is scientific explanations, not saying that that's every example that we see or hear, but that's definitely a piece to the puzzle. But when we read in Genesis 25, 22, it says, and this is talking about the birth, or the pregnancy, rather, of Esau. It says that the children struggled together within her, so she inquired of the Lord. And verse 23 says, the Lord said, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided, and one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So we have to remember, and this is something I always talk about on the show, when we read an ancient text, we always make the common mistake of trying to read that with modern eyes. It wasn't written to us. It was written to an ancient people.
Yeah.
So you need to put yourself in the mindset of those people to whom it was written to understand it properly. So when you're reading that, an ancient person knows the customs and traditions. The older gets the birthright. The older is the favored, the heir to the kingdom, so to speak. So this right there would have been a huge red flag to the ancient reader. No, the older shall serve the younger. No, this ain't right. So we need to keep things like that in mind when we read this here, as that would stand out. But the lexicon, when you look up the definition of the word stronger that was used here in verse 23, is the Hebrew word yamas, and this means stout. So clearly it says there's 2 nations, 2 peoples. That's already strange. It throws out a red flag. Hey, pay attention here. and then that the older shall serve the younger. So here, these people are looking at this and be like, man, something's weird, something's off here. What's going on? So when we go back to Genesis 3 and the curse, what did it say? It says, the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field, and on your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So it plainly says there's two seeds here. And just like our mutual friend L.A. Marzulli, it's the seed war. Everything hinges on Genesis 3:15. And I think that is the baseline for this whole story of the Epic of Esau.
So Esau and his brother are two, like, are they born like as two separate types of people, like literally types, like they're just like, it's not like you and I. It's like two separate types. That's what you're
I believe
saying.
So I believe what the text is trying to say, that it was two nations, two peoples. So, and this is just right after the Genesis 3:15 narrative. And as I go through, I'll there's lots of correlations. Like I said, it doesn't just come right out and say it. These are connections I've made and theories that I've made, but I believe they're in good company.
Let's get into it.
Okay. Now, the first off, and people that's familiar with Michael Heiser and his breakdown of the word serpent, Nakash. Well, Nakash can mean serpent, but just like the English language, we have words that have multiple meanings. So we have to read the context and see which fits better and what makes more sense. So another alternative to serpent for Nakash is the shining one, or one who practices divination. So to me, when I look at that, I ask myself, what makes more sense in this scenario? A talking snake or a divine being, a shining one who practices divination on the holy mountain of God in the Garden of Eden?
Yeah.
And to me, that's what makes more sense. And especially because of the reaction. If you look at the reaction, this Nakash strolls up and tells Eve, did God really say that ye shall die? No, ye shall be as gods. And she's not afraid. She trusts this thing, and she does it. So therefore, to me, that tells me that she trusted this thing. She's seen it every day. She was familiar with it. So this was a divine being on the heavenly council, the divine council, as Mike Heiser always says. And when we go through there, I had mentioned it, talking about putting the amenity between the two seeds. Well, in verse 20, this is where God makes the garments of skin and clothes them. Well, in Hebrew, it says that God clothes them. And this word in Hebrew is hilbish. Well, Adam's nakedness was covered by a kenonet. And this phrase is most frequently used in the Torah to describe the clothing of the priests in the tabernacle. So Exodus 29 and verse 8, chapter 28, verse 39 through 40, those are some examples, but it significantly is used to cover the nakedness. And with the Hebrew Bible and the writers, they would always use word associations, or the law of first mention. They would use different words on purpose for you to be like, oh, that was the word used in Genesis 3:15 in the cursing, so this must be connected in some way. So I think what the writers are trying to show here is the covering of this nakedness, this garment. It's trying to make a connection with a priestly garment, with this law of first mention and word associations. So, but it says here is that Adam is the prototypical high priest over all creation, and all subsequent divinity ordained priests trace their origins back to Adam in the garden. Now, this is, rabbinic tradition. So this is already a foundation that's been laid. So Aaron's annual task of passing beyond the images of the cherubim in place of God walks with his people. This is in Leviticus chapter 16, verse 2. Serves as a reminder of Adam's once privileged position in Eden before the fall. So the connection between Adam's original priesthood and the Aaronic high priesthood is most notably highlighted by the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 28. And now this is a letter written to a king. But when you read this, the language changes. You can see all of a sudden this is no human. And it describes the priestly ephod that was made in the wilderness wanderings that was dictated by God to Moses to make. So if we read that in verse 13, here's where it changes, and then you can tell this is no longer a human. It says, "You were in Eden, the garden of God, and every precious stone was your covering. Sardis, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, and carbuncle, and crafted in gold was your settings and your engravings. And on the day that you were created, they were prepared. You were an anointed guardian cherub, and I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God in the midst of the stones of fire. You walked and you were blameless in your ways from the day that you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. In the abundance of your trade, you were filled with violence in your midst, and you sinned. So I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O guardian cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire." And as you go down to verse 18, it says, "By the multitude of your iniquities, in your unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries." So they're describing word for word the priestly ephod. They immediately align him with having a sanctuary. Immediately it talks about he sinned and was cast from the mountain of God. So it's talking about this nakash. And then right there it shows you he had this covering, just as the book of Exodus and Leviticus says that it was a hilbish, it covered their nakedness. So when you go back to the Garden of God, when God gives them this clothing, it's my opinion that with all these dots right here and all these arrows pointing, it's showing that Satan was once the high priest of all creation. He had a sanctuary. He had a priestly ephod. And all these stones mentioned were all these various colors and gold inlays and settings. That would certainly fit the description of his name, Nakash, the shining one. Mm-hmm. I think that during this cursing from God, his priestly garments was ripped away and was given to Adam and Eve, and Adam was made the king and priest of all creation. And just as I read, it's all the rabbinic tradition that all traces their lineages back to Adam.
This was a preview of today's member episode. If you like what you heard and you want to hear more of it, go to theconfessionalspodcast.com. Become a member if you're listening on the podcast feed. And if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and click the join button or the link in the description, and you can become a member today on YouTube and get this show.